was a good show.
Thanks so much. Should do that.
Okay.
Or does Lily do that?
She's not here right now,
Oh,
so I
well,
guess.
sure.
Yes, I
You can
will.
do that then.
Wait, what time do you go on, Karen?
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock, so you're already not, okay. So. How do you like it framed?
So that's fine right there.
Right there.
I'll make maybe back a little bit. That's good right there.
There?
Thank
Okay. You're welcome. Do you want the other one in a particular way, or?
you. No, I think the other one is great. Maybe a little farther, not above, up. Less. That's it. A little more, just a little more, a little less stable. That's good. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Great. So we're set.
Oh, wait. It's supposed to be not too long ago.
So today's Thursday, 10/7/2016. We're going to have a show about Jill Stein and about her candidacy, the party program for the Greens. And we're going to take a look at the proposed initiative for the legalization of marijuana here in Massachusetts for 2016.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Yep. If you're ready, we can put you on.
We're ready.
You ready?
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of What We Should Know, coming to you from Cambridge Community Television here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The program that we're going to bring to you today is about the Jill Stein candidacy and about the program, the policy program of the Green Party, and the reason why the Green Party is the valid successor of Bernie Sanders, the progressive candidate who unified 46% of the primary and caucus vote nationally. So it's interesting to us to present an alternative to Sanders now that Hillary Clinton stole the primary, stole the Democratic nomination process. We've mentioned that in earlier shows. This is exactly the reason why Clinton does not deserve the presidency. It's also in reference to her manipulations in the run-up to the Democratic National Convention and her policies as Secretary of State. So, without further ado, let's get a look at the party program of Jill Stein. The reason why Jill Stein's party is the valid successor for Bernie Sanders is the fact that it's progressive and that it unifies the concepts and interests of the vast majority of the population. As we know, 99% of Americans own only about 50% of the wealth. The other 50% is owned by the 1% of Americans. So the question about what policies need to be in place are policies which benefit the 99% of Americans. Let's get a look basically at this party platform. It's Power to the People plan. And the most important action that one could take, and an action that's not being forwarded by either the Republican Party, who doesn't mention global warming at all. The Republican Party does not mention it at any point in their discussion of issues. But Sanders put the question of global warming squarely on the table. Clinton does not mention it and has no policies to bring about the curbing of greenhouse gases. But Jill Stein does. The Green Party puts that in center of their platform and enumerates it first: to enact an emergency Green New Deal to turn the tide on climate change, to revive the economy, and to make wars for oil obsolete. We will remember that it is exactly these wars for oil that the two previous Bush presidents got us involved, then in Iraq and then in Pakistan. In Pakistan, the vast number of refining opportunities and processing plants for heroin, and the fact that many of the personnel involved there in the Afghanistan mercenaries could be working and channeling these heroin back into the United States. We're talking about an opioid addiction. We're talking about heroin and the derivatives of heroin. This is precisely what happened in the Vietnam War, with massive amounts of drugs being used and consumed by the military in Vietnam, and then the channeling of these drugs then through various pathways back into the United States after the end of the war. It's precisely the way nations who have felt themselves wrong and under attack by an aggressor nation seek to bring about a decay from within. And it's no secret to the law enforcement that this is the pathways. It's not mentioned in public because of the realities of the popularity of the war among reactionary Republicans and among law enforcement and Secret Service agents. Let's get a look basically again at the second part of the party platform here. It says, after the enactment of an emergency platform, the implementation of a just transition that empowers those communities and workers most impacted by climate change. We see that it is not only a question of climate change taking place, but the impact that these changes in climate have. At the moment, we speak Category 4 hurricane is gathering power and destructive force along the east coast of Florida. The crisis we've seen when hurricanes hit the eastern seaboard is that massive numbers of families have their homes destroyed, belongings destroyed, and usually the insurance does not cover what is necessary for them to rebuild. Often it's caught up in bureaucratic red tape, and these individuals are often forced into a life of poverty, similar to the crises in which global warming has brought about a evaluation of insurance agencies limiting their liability to repay families in cases of destructive winds or elevated tides. This crisis has to be taken into account at a level in which the individual who is not responsible basically for climate change, it is the obligation of national policy to recognize the changes in climate, the reasons why climate is changing, and then enact measures to prevent the destruction of personal property by these forces. It's the denial, complete denial of the Republican Party of this reality and the failure of the Democratic Party to enact legislation which would curb greenhouse gases substantially and bring about a change which would provide security for families and for Americans living on the eastern seaboard. Other policies which have been brought about is the labeling of GMOs, support organic and regenerative agriculture, and support conservation to sustainable non-toxic materials and the use of closed-loop zero-waste processes. The second part of the policy platform by Greens is the jobs as a right and key support for labor. We see that labor is one of the key elements for the establishment of the middle class in the after World War II and through the early 1970s. The fact of a coherent and strong union process established security for the working class to be able to save money, buy homes, pay for college of their sons and daughters, and enable the continuation of the process of growing into the middle class to become a reality. The advance of workers' rights to form unions, achieve workplace democracy, and keep a fair share of the wealth that are created by unions are policies by Jill Stein in the Green Party to enact a Green Deal full employment program to create 20 million green jobs in sustainable energy, mass transit, sustainable organic agriculture, clean manufacturing, and improved infrastructure. We've mentioned on other programs that simply the changing of the energy from fossil fuel energy to sustainable energy in the form of solar energy would create tens of millions of jobs over a decade. It would completely transform the economy of the United States. But it's not the policies that the opponents of the Green Party mention. They don't mention, they say, make America great again, or we're going to bring jobs back, but they don't say how they're going to do this. If they mention they're going to rework the trade deals, those trade deals have to get signed off on by other nations, and that is where the problem comes about. But simply enacting legislation, progressive legislation, so that the manufacture of solar energy would generate the millions of jobs and a flourishing economy. Let's look simply at this. Say, for instance, that 50% of the energy used by utilities would have to be brought about by the year 2020. This would mean that the massive manufacturing, sales, distribution, installation, maintenance, repair of solar units would cause and bring about massive numbers of jobs and an economy which flourished inland within the United States, self-generated, not the question that Donald Trump says we're going to renegotiate, we're going to make America great again, without mentioning how he's going to do it. Jill Stein and the Green Party have put about a party platform which is clear through regenerative energy, through solar energy and sustainable energy processes, this would be brought about. Healthcare as a right. This is another point brought about by Bernie Sanders, and how important this healthcare system is. A healthcare system such as is available in Europe, in which every individual is in the nation has access to high-quality health care. That is an alleviation of a massive amounts of worries by families, by parents for their own parents, for their children. Massive amounts of insecurity is part of the daily process in the United States, with the threat of a terminal illness being contracted by the breadwinner of a family, and the quandary of having to direct all of the resources of the family into paying the hospital bills, and often at the end the costs to fight the illness are greater than the possibility that the family has to to overcome that crisis. And the reality is the family is then bankrupt, and the entire security and future of not only the immediate family but the children is in jeopardy. This is the crisis that we see also with global warming, with the continued inroads of rising tides, massive floods, hurricanes, typhoons, and the crisis of droughts, and the other part of the drought, the flooding, the drought killing crops, destroying livelihoods, and causing erosion to the extent that when it does rain, floods are generated, destroying property. This crisis is not being addressed by the Republican or the Democratic Party, but would be and is a center of the platform of the Greens. We'll get back now to the Medicare for All, a single-payer healthcare system, a public health program to provide everyone with a quality health care at huge savings by eliminating the $400 billion annually spent on paperwork and bureaucracy of health insurance. It's the HMOs that are consuming massive amounts of the amounts paid by the government for health insurance. It's not a single payer health care. It's a system in which the government provides funds so that research and development can be made by pharmaceuticals, but then allows them to sell their products at any price whatsoever. We've seen this as a scandal in reference to the cost of pharmaceuticals. But even worse than that is the immense amount of profits generated by HMOs in paperwork and the ineffectiveness. The United States gives more than 2.5 times more out for its healthcare system per capita, per person, than does England or Western Germany. And the results of this healthcare system are not as good. As a matter of fact, it's only the wealthy who have adequate health insurance because they can afford it, because they can afford to pay the prices, the exorbitant prices for the medicines. The crisis, of course, is this injustice that the individual may be good and honest, straightforward, law-abiding, a good parent, a good citizen, but poor in spite of their efforts. And then the contracting of an illness then ruining not only the immediate family, but the future generations as well. The end of overcharging for prescriptions is part of the program of the Greens to allow full access to contraceptive and reproductive rights is another part of the platform of the Green Party, to expand women's access to morning after contraception, to ensure that consumers have essential information on making informed food choices by expanding product labeling. And education as a right is a part of the system which Bernie Sanders was so clearly positive about the fact that every individual has a right to an education, has a right to reach their academic potential. It's in the interests of society that individuals have this opportunity to get an education which will allow them to have a successful future and not to be burdened by the immense costs of an education. What basically are we looking at? In the 1960s, public education at universities, public universities, was manageable by any middle-class family, and scholarships were provided for the qualified and gifted persons, so that the society profits from this. Recently, the Nobel Prize are being distributed. Many of scientists who have come up with great inventions and great contributions have done so coming from working class and lower middle class families, but where in past times the education has been manageable and affordable, that's not the case today. And what we have on many of the colleges and universities is a structure of elites who continue providing an education which is not one which allows individuals to compete with foreign nations. We've seen that the educational system in the United States ranks only 22nd or 23rd in international competitions with math and sciences. This is an unfortunate reality of the Republican Party's idea of charter school system. The charter school system is one in which private corporations are allowed to consume public funds to educate the upper middle class of a society. This is a Republican effort, a successful one, unfortunately, which is also on the ballot question here in Massachusetts. Let's get back to the education as a right on the party platform of the Greens. It says, to restore arts, music, and recreation is one of the ideas, to ensure racially inclusive, sensitive, and relevant curriculums, and not only curriculums accessible by the elites or the upper middle class, to recognize poverty as a key obstacle to learning and to ensure that kids come to school ready to learn, healthy, nourished, secure, and free from violence, and to increase federal funding for public schools to equalize public school funding. That part is the exact counterpart of the Bernie Sanders campaign, education, qualified education for everyone, and the idea of tuition-free public colleges and universities throughout the United States. A just economy, we've mentioned, as a job, guaranteeing a living wage job for all. Sanders said very clearly that it is a disgrace in the United States to have an individual work 40 hours a week and still live in poverty, to have two jobs, as is the case in the working poor, to have two jobs and work 60 hours a week and still not be able to make ends meet, to pay for lunch, pay for costs of a decent home and clothing and health care for the children. This is an absolute disgrace and one in which the call by the bigot and racist Donald Trump, make America great again, without mentioning precisely what Trump would want to do. What is required is some kind of justice in the United States. We've seen how discriminatory Trump is in reference to the working poor, singling out through derogatory, misogynistic comments about women, about poor, about minorities, and about the Mexicans and Mexican Americans. This individual has no place in the candidacy, but the right wing and the Republican Party. It should be mentioned again that it's the Republican Party that is responsible for the rise of Donald Trump and his tactic of attacking and splitting this nation rather than finding a way to integrate and heal the realities which have come about. His neglect of mentioning anything in reference to global warming, which is a truly massive threat to the stability of the United States and recognized by the security forces, the realities that Trump is not a uniter in any way, but one who pits one class, one group against another. We've seen this also in his statements about his pride in not paying bills, his pride in manipulating resources so that he comes out on top, and whoever was unfortunate enough to work honestly with Trump is then receives the massive disadvantage, and he is proud of this. Trump is this type of individual who is in any other period in time would be seen as the disgraceful individual with disgraceful conduct that he is. But it is the Republican Party who has brought forth the acceptance of this individual as a candidate for the United States presidency. It is a scandal internationally and frightening to many of our allies worldwide. Let's get a look back again in reference to just economy, to take action against wage theft, to enact paid sick leave and family care, and strong overtime protections. This idea of family leave is incredibly important, as is the idea of daycare. Many families in the United States give out nearly a quarter of their income for daycare services. They have no opportunity but to pay these daycare services because both parents have to work. So daycare is absolutely a central aspect, where daycare in European nations like a healthcare system, a single-payer healthcare system, enables everyone to have adequate healthcare. The establishment of a daycare system so that families and parents who have to work can be certain that their children are cared for. This was the case in the United States after World War II. Affordable daycare when jobs were plentiful and the middle class was established and working well. Freedom and equality, we see that as a position integral to the Green Party platform. The next part is the criminal justice reform. That's an oxymoron, criminal justice. In the United States, there is very little justice to criminals. They are incarcerated and not provided an opportunity then to be rehabilitated. They're brutalized, as is seen in the Attica shooting in the early 1970s. So to end the failed war on drugs is an important part of the Green Party platform. To replace drug prohibition with harm reduction, to legalize marijuana and hemp, to treat substance abuse as a health issue and not as a criminal offense, to release nonviolent drug offenders from prison, removing them such offenses from their record, and to provide them with pre and post release support, to end police brutality, mass incarceration, and institutional racism within our justice system, and to support Black Lives Matter movement. To decriminalize and demilitarize police, to end the use of SWAT teams and no-knock raids for drugs and for serving papers, to repair our communities rather than dump resources into the prison industrial complex, to establish police review boards so that communities control their police and not the other way around. This is an essential part of the Green Party platform, and one long overdue. It's the police, basically, that control the towns and cities. We see that by the impunity with which police officers continue to kill blacks in situations in which other less than a deadly force could have been used. The fact of police using violence immediately upon arriving on the scene, rather than trying to negotiate or wait for communication. Highly trained individuals from police forces, some of whom are already available to be called to the scene to de-escalate. Often it is the police who shoot first and then maintain that they thought a weapon was there. We've spoken about this in the past. The crisis is that the Supreme Court has given the police the right that if a police officer subjectively feels as though he is in danger, he can use deadly force. That has been expanded so that if police officers feel that another police officer is in danger subjectively, they can use deadly force. It is the termination of the lives of individuals, many of whom are simply mentally ill or stressed and not with a history of violence, who are being killed by police. This is a situation that is untenable. It's untenable because life, and this is in contradiction to what pro-life advocates say. Many pro-life advocates who are against abortion support violence of police against minorities and blacks. This is a contradiction. They maintain that life is sacred and should not be allowed in abortions, but the killing then of unarmed teenagers, the killing of unarmed individuals, those fleeing perhaps under questionable circumstances, not having been proven as guilty, just simply fleeing, who are then killed by police officers. The idea being that to enact laws to require independent outside legal representatives to investigate and prosecute any killing or brutality by police rather than prosecutors involved in the local criminal justice system. This is one of the problems. We've spoken also about the drug laws, and we would like to get a look basically here in the last few minutes of our program in reference to the ballot initiative in Massachusetts. This program is coming to you from Cambridge, Massachusetts. The question of the legalization of marijuana is on the ballot, and we would like to take a few minutes in reference to this question because we feel it is important the way this initiative has been brought forward. The question about those opposing the legalization is a cabal. One can only call it this, of the entrenched conservative opposition in politics and those who have been against the legalization of marijuana for a very long time. We will remember that the violence in which the Bush government and the Obama government pushed forward in against Iraq and Afghanistan, Afghanistan being the primary producer of heroin worldwide. The pushing forward on these wars in Afghanistan with drug lords being called to support the efforts of the U.S. military through providing logistic resources has led to the drug crisis that we have in the United States presently with massive numbers of opioid overdoses. But even though that's the case, conservative forces are not willing to see that marijuana is not an opioid, and the regulation of marijuana for the public is immensely popular and a source of enormous tax revenue. It's the Republicans, again, who call for the prohibition of the raising of taxes and the prohibition of the legalization of marijuana, which is a vital, or could be a vital tax resource. And we would like to get a look basically for those viewing the program here from Massachusetts about the realities of the revenue. Although the revenue is projected to be $100 million in Massachusetts, and the regulation through the Cannabis Control Commission is extensive. This bill goes on for at least 10 pages, and for the application fee to issue and renewal of a license to operate a marijuana establishment, the initial application fee is $3,000. For the issuing of a retail marijuana store is $15,000, and that is to be paid each year. For the license of a marijuana product manufacturer, also $15,000, and for the license of a marijuana cultivator, $15,000, and for the license for a marijuana testing facility is $10,000. So we see very high costs for the licensing, and the regulations are very stringent, as this question for law proposed by initiative petition. It also says, in reference to, if a town or a city limits the number of marijuana establishments that may be licensed in the city or town pursuant to Clause 2 or subsection A or section 3 of this chapter, and that limit prevents the commission from issuing a license to all applicants who meet the requirements of subsection B. That is the term, and so this law is drawn up very, very restrictive, many clauses and control for the personal use of marijuana. This is also an interesting point, notwithstanding any other general or special law to the contrary, except as otherwise provided. In this chapter, a person 21 years of age shall not be arrested, prosecuted, penalized, sanctioned, or disqualified under the laws of the Commonwealth in any manner or denied any right or privilege, and shall not be subject to seizure or forfeiture of the assets. This is a very sound position in reference to this initiative. We find here, however, that the smoking of marijuana, according to this, is not permitted in public. The smoking of cigarettes and vaping is promoted and allowed in public, but that of marijuana is not. It's this continued discrimination, the proof of the ill effects of tobacco, the proof of the ill effects of alcohol, and yet alcohol establishments, vaping, and the selling of cigarettes is ubiquitous and unchallenged and barely regulated. It's this prejudice against marijuana seen as just a reactionary prejudice. The questions of similar structures and laws have been very successful in Colorado and in Oregon, with great tax revenues and large amounts of capital and tax resources, which then can be put to use in the society. So if we can get back now, that's the ballot initiative. The law would come into effect on the 15th of December 2016, after the ballot taking place on November 8th, the same day as the presidential election, in which we hope Jill Stein will be elected. The point of discussion before we move forward with the next section is why a third-party candidate? The third party is essential to break the manipulation of the Republican and Democratic parties, preventing the debates, preventing Jill Stein from taking part in the debates, although the presidential debates, although 18 candidates from the Republican Party were on stage for the primaries. The candidates then for presidency are limited then, of course, to the parties that control the entire political destiny in the United States, the Republican and Democratic parties, who also are the parties that regulate and allow the debate structures through the debate commission. Both the Democrat and Republican parties are unified in preventing other parties, third parties, from coming forward and challenging necessary progress. But we are calling upon the audience not to be intimidated by the Democrats and Republicans about your vote is the deciding one. The election is going to be that close. If you look at Donald Trump, if you look at the manner in which this individual bears himself, it is truly difficult to imagine that our neighbors would elect this individual into the presidency of the United States. It would be a horrific day, truly, in the annals of the United States. The intimidation and the manipulation by the Democratic Party against Bernie Sanders is a placard is behind us. Although he unified 46% of the caucus and primary vote against Hillary Clinton, that's within the margin of error in the calculation and counting of the ballots. Although that is the case, he has had not been permitted to put forth a major party political planks. Wasserman Schultz is responsible for the manipulation of the Democratic convention and the refusal Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, the refusal to allow a negotiation so that important parts of the program for Bernie Sanders would be initiated. We are calling for that reason that the vote be given to Jill Stein and the establishment of a party, a progressive party in the United States, so that it will be given public funds so that the ideas of climate change prevention, the establishment of alternative energy forms can be debated publicly, to empower the people to fix our broken democratic system. This is an important plank within the Green Party to eliminate the doctrine of corporate personhood that, among other things, has been used to justify unlimited corporate spending in elections, with a constitutional amendment to clarify that only human beings have constitutional rights and not corporations, to enact electoral reforms that break the big money stronghold and create truly representative democracy, full public election financing, ranked choice voting, proportional representation, and open debates. To abolish the Electoral College and directly elect the president using a national popular vote with ranked choice voting, and to restore the right to run for office and eliminate unopposed races by removing ballot access barriers. These are important party platforms of the Greens in reference to the restoration of democratic structures in the United States, and to restore the right to run for office and eliminate unopposed races. We've seen it to eliminate winner-take-all first-past-the-post elections in which the winner may not have the support of most of the voters, to replace that system with ranked choice voting and proportional representation. Very, very important suggestions. To restore voting rights to offenders, including those while in prison. One man, one vote, that is what Jill Stein is proposing here. To enact a simplified, safe, same-day voter registration to the nation so that no qualified voter is barred from the polls. So in the last few minutes, thank you ever so much for joining us here at What We Should Know and Peace Worker Radio here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. In this plea to give your vote for the Greens, for a third party that is progressive, one which will enact changes in our lives, which will promote full employment. We've mentioned the reworking of the energy system so that fossil fuel and renewable energy, so that renewable energy replaces fossil fuel and generates a thriving economy. This is not the position of the Democrats or the Republican Party. They want to keep the situation and control of energy as it is. In the hands of big banks, in the hands of energy and big oil, and deny, consequently, the realities of global warming. Jill Stein and the Republican Party are exactly in opposition in reference to this. We're calling upon our viewers and supporters to give their vote in the Democratic election on the 8th to Jill Stein. Thanks ever so much for joining us here from Peace Worker Radio from Cambridge, Massachusetts. And at the end of our program, a look along Main Street. Thank you and have a good night.